There's a moment in everyone's life when they realize the person they trusted most was living a lie. For the congregation of Riverside Community Church, that moment came on a cold February morning when their beloved pastor's wife was found dead in the parking lot. A single gunshot wound to the chest, her phone clutched in her hand, and a text message that would unravel everything they thought they knew about faith, family, and the man who stood at their pulpit every Sunday. This is the story of how a secret became a murder, and how the truth can sometimes cost you everything. Pastor Michael Reed wasn't just a man of God. He was the kind of man mothers wanted their daughters to marry and fathers wanted their sons to become. At 42 years old, he had everything: a beautiful wife, 3 healthy children, a thriving church with over 2,000 members. Every Sunday morning he'd stand behind that wooden pulpit and deliver sermons that made grown men cry and skeptics reconsider their doubt. He had this way of making you feel seen, like he understood the weight you carried. People didn't just attend Riverside Community Church, they belonged to it. They brought their broken marriages, their prodigal children, their grief. And Pastor Reed met them with open arms and scriptures that felt like love letters written specifically for their pain. Vanessa Reed was his perfect complement. 39 years old, blonde hair always styled in soft waves, a smile that could light up any room. She ran the women's ministry, organized church potlucks, led Bible studies, and volunteered at the local food bank every Saturday. The Reed family was Riverside's golden standard. Their oldest daughter, Emily, was studying pre-med at State University. Their son, Jacob, played varsity basketball and led the youth worship team. Their youngest, Lily, was only 8 but already had her mother's grace and her father's charisma. But here's what nobody tells you about perfect families: they don't exist. And the harder someone works to maintain that illusion, the bigger the cracks hiding underneath. Michael and Vanessa's marriage looked flawless from the outside, but like most marriages spanning 2 decades, it had its seasons. Michael spent more time at the church, late-night counseling sessions, weekend retreats, board meetings that stretched longer and longer. Vanessa threw herself into ministry work, into the kids' schedules, into anything that kept her busy enough not to notice the growing distance between them. They still smiled at each other during Sunday service, still posted family photos on social media with captions about being blessed beyond measure. But behind closed doors, they'd become strangers performing a well-rehearsed routine. Then came Sarah Matthews, 26 years old, new to town, looking for community after a painful breakup. She started attending Riverside in September, sitting 3 rows from the back, always alone. She had that kind of beauty that didn't demand attention, but somehow always received it. She signed up to volunteer with the worship team. Michael noticed her during a Wednesday evening service when she stayed late to help fold chairs. They struck up a conversation about music, about faith, about the difficulty of starting over. It was innocent at first, just a pastor being pastoral, but somewhere between coffee meetings and text messages checking in on her well-being, the line blurred. By November, they were meeting twice a week, always somewhere public, never anywhere that would raise suspicion, because they both told themselves nothing wrong was happening. But the human heart is a complicated thing, and somewhere in those conversations, something shifted. Michael found himself thinking about Sarah during sermon preparation, checking his phone more frequently, feeling a flutter in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. And Sarah, lonely and vulnerable, began to see Michael as more than just her pastor. She saw him as someone who truly understood her, who made her feel valued. Neither of them meant for it to happen. But by December, what started as emotional intimacy had crossed into something neither of them could take back. It happened in his office on a Tuesday night. She'd come by to drop off song selections for the Christmas service. He was there late, working on his sermon. They talked for hours. She cried about her ex. He opened up about feeling disconnected from Vanessa. And then there was this moment where they stopped being pastor and congregant and became just 2 people who felt seen by each other. The affair lasted 3 months. 3 months of stolen moments and deleted text messages and lies that piled up so high they could barely see over them anymore. Michael lived 2 completely different lives. On Sundays, he was the devoted husband, the spiritual leader, the man who preached about integrity and faithfulness. The rest of the week, he was someone who lied to his wife about where he'd been, someone who justified his actions by telling himself his marriage was already broken anyway. But Vanessa wasn't blind. Wives never are. She noticed the distance first. The way Michael would turn his phone face down when she walked into the room. The way he suddenly needed to shower as soon as he got home. The way he seemed distracted even when sitting right next to her. She told herself she was being paranoid. But doubt has a way of eating at you, especially when your instincts keep screaming that something isn't right. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. February 14th. Valentine's Day. The day that should have been about love became the day everything fell apart. Vanessa had planned a surprise for Michael. She'd dropped the kids off at her sister's house, made reservations at the Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date, bought a new dress she hoped would remind him of who they used to be. She decided to stop by the church first to leave a card on his desk. The church parking lot was nearly empty when she arrived around 3 in the afternoon. She walked through the side entrance, her heels clicking against the tile floor. She could hear voices inside Michael's office. His voice and another voice, a woman's voice, soft and intimate in a way that made Vanessa's stomach drop. She stood there in that hallway for what felt like an eternity. Every instinct told her to turn around, to walk away. But she'd spent 6 months ignoring her instincts. So she opened the door, and there they were, her husband and Sarah Matthews. They were sitting close together on the leather couch, his hand covering hers, their foreheads almost touching. The look on their faces when Vanessa walked in wasn't guilt. It was worse. It was the look of 2 people who'd been caught in the middle of something real, something they weren't ready to give up. Sarah jumped up first, stammering apologies. Michael stood slowly, his face draining of color, his mouth opening but no words coming out. And Vanessa just stood there, that Valentine's card still clutched in her hand, watching her entire life crumble in real time. She didn't say anything. She turned and walked out, leaving the card on the floor. She got in her car and drove. Not home, not to her sister's, just drove aimlessly through town, trying to breathe through the tightness in her chest. Michael called 17 times in the first hour. She didn't answer. By the time Vanessa finally pulled over, she was in a grocery store parking lot 5 miles from home, sobbing so hard she thought she might be sick. Then she drove home. The house was dark and empty. She poured herself a glass of wine she wouldn't drink and sat at the kitchen table staring at wedding photos on the wall. 20 years, 3 children, a ministry they'd built together, all of it reduced to a lie. Michael came home around midnight. He tried to explain, told her it had been a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that he'd end it immediately, but Vanessa didn't want excuses. She wanted to know why. Michael didn't have a good answer. He talked about feeling lost, about the pressure of always having to be perfect. He cried, and part of Vanessa wanted to comfort him. But the other part, the part screaming in pain, couldn't get past the betrayal. They talked until dawn. Vanessa said she needed time to think, space to process. Michael said he'd do whatever it took to fix this, that he'd go to counseling, end all contact with Sarah, resign from the church if that's what she wanted. The next few weeks were torture. Michael moved into the guest room. They told the kids Daddy was dealing with stress. Michael did end things with Sarah via a cold final text message. Sarah was devastated. She'd convinced herself that maybe he'd leave Vanessa and they'd build a life together. She started looking for jobs in other cities. Meanwhile, Vanessa was trying to decide whether her marriage was worth saving. She talked to her sister, who told her to leave. Talked to her mother, who told her to forgive. Went to a therapist who asked her what she wanted. And the truth was, Vanessa didn't know. She started going through Michael's phone records. That's when she found the deleted messages. The affair had started earlier than Michael admitted. Not December, but October. There were hotel receipts, charges on their credit card that were actually rooms at the Hampton Inn. There were text messages that made her physically ill to read. I love yous and I miss yous, and detailed plans for a future together. Plans that involved Michael leaving Vanessa once the kids were older. He'd been planning to leave her. And that revelation killed whatever hope Vanessa had been holding on to. She confronted him with the evidence on a Wednesday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after she'd walked into his office. Michael tried to deny it at first, but Vanessa was done listening to lies. She told him she was going to tell the church board, that the congregation deserved to know their pastor had been living a double life. Michael panicked. His entire identity was wrapped up in being Pastor Reed. If Vanessa exposed him, he'd lose everything. The church, his reputation, his income, his standing in the community. He begged her not to say anything, but Vanessa wasn't interested in protecting him anymore. She told him she'd scheduled a meeting with the church board for Friday evening, told him he had 2 days to figure out what he was going to say, because she was going to tell them everything if he didn't. Michael didn't sleep for the next 48 hours. He paced the guest room, tried to pray but couldn't find the words. If he resigned voluntarily, maybe he could control the narrative, but if Vanessa told the board the truth, there would be no controlling anything. Thursday night, he tried one more time to change Vanessa's mind. She told him the meeting was happening. Told him she'd spent 20 years standing beside him, supporting his dreams, raising his children, building his ministry, and he'd thrown it all away. If he wanted to save anything, he needed to start by being honest. Michael left that conversation knowing there was no way out. By Friday afternoon, the board would know everything. Friday morning arrived cold and gray. Vanessa decided to meet with the chairman, Tom Harrison, earlier to give him a heads up. Tom and his wife Linda had helped Michael and Vanessa plant the church 14 years ago. They deserved to hear the truth from her first. She texted Tom around 2 p.m., asked if they could meet at the church around 5. Vanessa spent the afternoon going through papers in Michael's home office, bank statements, credit card bills, phone records. That's when she found the letter, tucked in the back of his desk drawer, dated 2 weeks ago. It was addressed to Sarah. He'd never sent it, but the words were there, expressing love and regret and hope that someday they could find their way back to each other. Reading it felt like being stabbed all over again. By 4:30, she was in her car heading to the church. Tom Harrison arrived at 5 p.m. exactly. They went inside together, settled into a conference room. Vanessa didn't waste time. She laid out everything: the affair, the lies, the deleted messages, the hotel receipts, the letter to Sarah. Showed him all the evidence. Tom sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he looked up and asked why she didn't come to them sooner. Vanessa told him the truth. Because she'd hoped they could fix it privately, because even after everything, some part of her still loved her husband and didn't want to destroy him. But now she knew there was no fixing this. Tom nodded, said he'd call an emergency board meeting for 7. Michael knew the board meeting was happening. By 6 p.m., the church parking lot started filling up. Board members arriving early, talking in hushed voices, casting glances toward Michael's office. He sent Vanessa a text around 6:15. One last desperate attempt. We can still fix this. Think about the kids. Please don't do this. She read it, but didn't respond. At 6:30, Michael grabbed his keys and headed to the parking lot. He wasn't going to wait for his execution. If this was happening, he needed to talk to Vanessa one more time. He called her as he got in his truck. She answered. He asked if he could come over. There was a long pause. Then Vanessa said, "Okay, but make it quick." Michael drove faster than he should have. He pulled into their driveway at 6:45. Vanessa was in the kitchen, papers spread across the counter. Michael stood in the doorway. Finally, he said what he should have said 3 weeks ago. "I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know I'm sorry." Vanessa looked at him, and he could see she wanted to believe him. But love isn't enough when trust is gone. She told him it was too late for apologies, told him she needed him to take accountability in front of the board. and that's when Vanessa told him the other part. She'd called a lawyer that morning, filed for divorce. She was taking the kids and moving to her mother's place 3 hours away. Michael felt something inside him crack. It wasn't just losing the church, it was losing his family, his kids. He asked her not to take the children away. She said it wasn't up for discussion. The conversation escalated, voices rising. "How dare you act like the victim here?" Vanessa said. "You did this. You destroyed our family." Michael was shaking now. "I made a mistake, one mistake, and you're going to destroy me for it. Where's the grace in that?" Vanessa stared at him. "Grace isn't the same as stupidity, and forgiveness doesn't mean I have to let you keep hurting me." She picked up her purse, grabbed the folder with evidence, headed toward the door, told Michael she'd see him at the meeting. But Michael didn't move. Something inside him snapped. All the pressure, all the fear, all the rage. It rose up in him like a wave, and before he could process what he was doing, he followed her. Vanessa made it to her car, opened the door, tossed the folder onto the passenger seat. Michael was right behind her, still talking, still pleading. "Please, think about what this will do to the church. That's the problem, Michael. You're still more worried about the church than you are about what you did to me." She got in the car, started the engine. Michael stood there in the driveway, feeling like he was falling. He watched her put the car in reverse, and that's when he saw it, his father's handgun in the glove compartment. He'd kept it there for years, ever since someone had broken into the church parking lot. Protection, he'd told himself. He reached in through the passenger window before Vanessa could back out, grabbed the gun, held it without thinking. Vanessa saw the gun and froze. "Michael, what are you doing? Put that down." But Michael wasn't listening anymore. "If you tell them, I'll lose everything. You can't tell them. Please." "Okay," she said. "Okay, I won't. Michael, please put the gun down." But Michael had crossed a line. His finger was on the trigger, and all it took was one moment of pressure. One terrible, irreversible moment. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Vanessa slumped forward against the steering wheel, blood spreading across her chest. Michael stood there, the gun still in his hand, unable to process what he'd just done. He dropped the gun, stumbled backward. Then he did what any desperate man does when he realizes he's destroyed everything. He ran. Emily Reed found her mother's body at 8:15 p.m. Her screams brought neighbors running. Within minutes, the quiet suburban street was swarming with police cars and crime scene tape. Detective Sarah Chen arrived at 8:30. She walked the scene, noted the trajectory of the bullet, the lack of defensive wounds. This wasn't random. This was personal. She asked the neighbors if they'd seen anything. One woman said she'd heard voices earlier, around 6:45, a man and woman arguing. Then maybe 10 minutes later, a sound she thought was a firecracker, but now realized was probably a gunshot. Detective Chen asked about the family. The neighbors painted a picture of perfection. But Chen had been doing this long enough to know that perfect families don't usually end with murder in the driveway. Emily, still in shock, told them about the affair, about her parents' marriage falling apart, about the board meeting that was supposed to happen tonight. Chen immediately called Tom Harrison, got the full story. Suddenly, this case had a motive. By 9 p.m., an APB was out for Michael Reed's truck. By 10 p.m., his face was on every news station. Beloved local pastor wanted for questioning in wife's murder. Sarah Matthews saw the news and immediately called the police, told them everything, the affair, the lies, the letter Michael had written. Michael was found 36 hours later at a motel in Tennessee. Police surrounded the building at dawn. Michael emerged, looking like a ghost. He didn't resist, just put his hands behind his back and let them cuff him. Detective Chen led the interrogation. She'd dealt with men like Michael before, good men who'd done terrible things. She started gentle, asked him to tell her what happened. Michael sat in that interrogation room, and for the first time in his life, he had nowhere to hide, no pulpit to stand behind, no image to maintain. He started talking around hour 2, told Chen everything. How he'd just wanted Vanessa to stop, to listen, to give him one more chance. He described reaching for the gun without thinking, said it was like his hand moved on its own, said he never meant to pull the trigger, that it just happened, that 1 second the gun was in his hand, and the next second Vanessa was slumped over and there was blood everywhere. Detective Chen asked Michael if he knew what he'd done. Really knew. He'd killed the mother of his children, the woman who'd stood by him for 20 years. And for what? To protect his reputation? Michael broke down completely, said he knew, said he'd destroyed everything, said he wished he could take it back, but he couldn't. The confession was recorded, signed, submitted as evidence. But the prosecution had the deleted text messages Michael had sent to Vanessa in the weeks leading up to her death. "If you tell them, I'll lose everything. I can't let you do this." Messages that showed premeditation. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Emily, Jacob, and Lily sat in the front row every single day. Sarah Matthews testified, her voice shaking. Tom Harrison testified about Vanessa's courage. And through it all, Michael sat at the defense table looking like a man who'd already been convicted by his own conscience. The prosecution painted him as a narcissist who valued his image more than his wife's life. The defense tried to paint him as a good man who'd made mistakes, who'd acted in a moment of panic. But the jury saw through it. They deliberated for 11 hours, found him guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 25 years to life. The Riverside Community Church never recovered. Half the congregation left within the first month. They eventually merged with another church, sold the property to a developer who turned it into luxury condos. Tom Harrison said the hardest part was losing their faith in their own judgment. Emily, Jacob, and Lily moved in with Vanessa's mother. Emily took a semester off from college to help raise her younger siblings. Jacob quit basketball. Lily stopped talking for 4 months. They all went to therapy, but some wounds don't heal, they just scar over. Sarah Matthews moved to Oregon, changed her name, started over. She wrote Michael one letter after the trial, telling him she forgave him but never wanted to hear from him again.